So the first video I ever uploaded was a review of Sorry Wrong Ed. And in that review, I said the biggest issue with it was Double D, as he seemed out of character and like a giant asshole. Well, much to my surprise, a few people will argue that Double D has always been an asshole, and some even say he's been worse in other episodes. Well, shit, man, I must really not remember this show as well as I think I do, if I've never really noticed that Double D's always been an asshole. Now, let's see what episodes they listed as examples. Dimlet Ed and My Fair Ed. Oh yeah, I remember those episodes. In Dimlet Ed, Double D tries to make the cul-de-sac kids smarter by way of a scavenger hunt. Yeah, you asshole. What the hell's wrong with you? What do you think you're doing? Why would you try and do something like that? You fucking sicken me. No, actually, the assholeness comes from his smug personality about the whole thing. So, I get where people are coming from.
You need help. You all need help.
Shut the fuck up!
In My Fair Ed, Double D tries to get Ed and Eddy to become more respectable.
What the? Ow!
Yeah, that could be considered douchey as well, because Double D is trying to change Ed and Eddy for just being themselves. But this is what happens. Ed and Eddy help Double D unload his groceries, and they end up making a huge mess and destroy the house.
Come on, Ed, just a little bite. Stay away, puffy green stocky thing!
On the screen again, Ed. Father hasn't recovered from the last time you ate it.
Now, while this is going on, the Eds end up destroying property of all the cul-de-sac kids, and Double D is the one who gets saddled with the blame for it.
Eddy, Kevin said he's going to do this to my legs.
So Double D abused Ed and Eddy when they didn't do anything wrong, huh? Don't know what show you've been watching, buddy.
You and Ed have done it this time.
But even with all that, he does end up realizing he's wrong and ends up regretting trying to change them in the first place. So I mean, that's something. But whatever, let's talk about the episode that's been brought up a few times that, honestly, I don't see where people are coming from. Brother, can you spare an Ed? This one is the most shocking by far as an example of how Double D is an asshole. And I'll explain why in this review. Now, I promised in my Your Ed Here review that I wouldn't do any more negative reviews about an episode of Ed, Edd, and Eddy. And don't worry, I'm not breaking my promise because I really enjoy Brother, Can You Spare an Ed? I think it's a solid episode, and I also want to do a follow-up to my Sorry Wrong Ed review because since it was my first one, it's easily not my best one. Ouch. And I left a lot out of that review that I want to touch on. So that's enough of an intro. Let's get started. Brother, Can You Spare an Ed starts out with Sarah giving Ed her money to buy her and Jimmy fudge from the candy store. Eddy tells Ed to buy Jawbreakers instead, and Double D tells him that would be wrong because it's Sarah's money, not Ed's.
Stop right there. It's Sarah's money, and if fudge Sarah wants, fudge Sarah gets.
Well, Double D's right. It's not Ed's money, so he has no right to spend it on Jawbreakers. Double D and Eddy start arguing about what's right, and...
Integrity in Latin means buy Jawbreakers. Get the picture?
Oh, wow. The episode itself is implying that Eddy's in the wrong by making him the wrong side of Eddy's conscience.
Fudge is the honorable path.
That's stupid. Come on, Ed. You know you wanna. Who's gonna know?
Actually, you know what? That doesn't count, because they've had episodes that have also implied that Jimmy was in the right for framing all three Eds, when only Eddy was the one who did any wrong. So, I'll disqualify that argument. Well, Ed ends up listening to Eddy instead and buys Jawbreakers for the Eds. And against Double D's wishes, they end up making him eat his Jawbreaker as well.
How can something so bad taste so good?
Well, I guess you can argue that's something wrong Double D did, even though he was literally forced to do it. Eddy tells Ed and Double D to avoid Sarah at all costs so she doesn't find out what they did. But unfortunately, she does find out.
Where the heck's my fudge, Ed?
I spent your money on Jawbreakers, Sarah! Have pity as I cannot control my brain!
Well, Sarah is of course furious at Ed for spending her money on candy for himself and his friends. And honestly, she has every right to be angry about that. Which is one of the few times I can actually say I agree with her. Double D offers to pay her back with interest, which I think sounds fair.
How are we supposed to pay her back? We're broke!
You got us into this. Well,
That's true, Eddy did get them into it, so he should be the one coming up with how to get the money back. Eddy ends up charging Kevin to give Double D and Ed wedgies, and then charges Johnny to beat them with a stick like piñatas.
let me see that. You're short!
It's mine!
Wait, Eddy wasn't even trying to pay her back? He literally just refused to give the money to Sarah. Okay, so Eddy's done nothing wrong, huh? Because so far, Eddy talked Ed into buying Jawbreakers even though it wasn't Ed's money, got them in trouble with Sarah, is charging people to put his friends into misery when he's the one that got them in trouble in the first place, and now he's making it look like he didn't even do it to pay off their debt anyway. I don't know, but to me, that looks like Eddy's done a lot of wrong in this episode. Well, Double D and Ed end up turning the tables on Eddy and charge the cul-de-sac kids a penny each to beat him up. And honestly, this is deserved at this point. I mean, I'll admit it's a little bit extreme, but everything that's happened, Eddy has actually brought onto himself.
Oh, man! Oh, me!
Now, this is where I get into my Sorry Wrong Ed review, because it can be argued that Eddy brought all of his misery onto himself in Sorry Wrong Ed, just like he did in Brother Can You Spare an Ed. But all Eddy did was take something that Rolf was trying to get rid of anyway. I mean, you can argue that he should have listened to Rolf's warnings, but can you really blame him for not listening to Rolf? I mean, aside from the Eds, Rolf is my favorite character in this show, but Rolf isn't exactly the most level-headed kid. This is the same guy who puts eels in people's pants as forgiveness and saran wraps everything in his house. Him being afraid of a phone for whatever reason doesn't seem too far-fetched. And also, how would Eddy possibly know that the phone was cursed? Yes, Rolf does call it a messenger of doom, but that doesn't exactly make it sound like the phone is cursed. So, I really don't think Eddy brought this onto himself at all.
I know where you're going with this, Eddy! Nighty-night!
Now, as for Double D, he's completely out of character because he has no reason to react the way he does to Eddy's pain. Now, in the other episodes, Double D clearly has a reason, albeit a bit poor but still understandable, to why he's doing what he's doing. Here, he's gloating about his friend's pain because he mistakenly assumes the phone wasn't what was cursed and jumps to the conclusion that everything that's happening to Eddy is a coincidence.
Why me?
Coincidence, Eddy!
I mean, as a smart kid, wouldn't coincidence be the last thing at this point you would conclude? What are the odds of a sandbox falling on you, getting struck by lightning, and a house collapsing on you all in the same minute? Even for the universe that the Eds live in, this would still seem out of the ordinary.
Ha! Proof positive! These unfortunate incidents have been nothing more than coincidence.
If Double D really believed what was happening was all by coincidence, then he's either a complete idiot or a sadist who just likes watching his friend get tortured.
I don't see a phone. No phone, no curse. I rest my case.
Double D isn't being an asshole in Brother Can You Spare an Ed, however. If anything, he's the only one doing anything right. He tried to tell Ed to buy the fudge instead of the Jawbreakers. He offered to pay Sarah back to avoid Ed getting into trouble. He stepped in front of Sarah when she was about to jump Ed. I mean, at this point, that's just understepping in front of a bullet for someone. And he ended up punishing Eddy for being in the wrong for the whole episode. Now, I understand that if Eddy didn't do what he did, then there wouldn't be an episode. But my question is, why consider Double D the asshole? What did he do other than try to make things right? And I don't see how Eddy didn't do anything wrong when that's literally all he did. Now, bottom line, I do enjoy this episode. I think it's really well written, I think it's very entertaining, and it punishes a person who deserves to be punished. And no, I don't hate Eddy. I love Eddy. He's easily my favorite character in this show. But for the same reasons, Bender's my favorite character in Futurama, and Cartman is my favorite character in South Park. When they act like assholes, there are repercussions, and they usually get punished in a very hilarious way. So, bottom line, this episode did what it should have done. It had a character that created the problem, made the problem worse, and in the end, suffered consequences, while the characters that were being unjustly punished ended up getting a resolution. Now, in conclusion, is Double D an asshole? Well, my answer to that is no, he's not. He's a smart kid whose knowledge can be a little too much sometimes, but aside from Sorry Wrong Ed, Double D isn't an asshole. He can be annoying, he can be a know-it-all, but for the most part, he's a good kid and a great character. Now, I want to apologize to the people who've been watching this for as long as they have, because I haven't really talked about many shows. Almost all of my reviews have either been about Ed, Edd, and Eddy, Family Guy, or Futurama. So, I think it's time to talk about a different show for a change. What show haven't I talked about yet? Oh, SpongeBob. Okay, that can work. What should I start out with? Oh, fuck me.